Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Melton Borough Council Scrutiny Committee. I'm Mike Brown, Chair of the committee. I'll just go through the normal housekeeping matters first. Members are reminded that we will be using the audio visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed live on YouTube. Members are asked to physically raise their hands in the usual way to indicate they wish to speak. Please switch mobile phones to silent. Should you need to leave the room during the meeting, unless it's an emergency evacuation, when the emergency exit should be used, please use the marked exit and entrance. I'll now provide a reminder of the evacuation procedure. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by the emergency exit. Please assemble on the far side of the front car park nearest to the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist persons who require any assistance. Public recording of the meeting. There is legislation that allows the public to film, record or use social media at a council meeting. This must not be disruptive to the good order of the meeting, nor include any filming or recording of the public seated area. In attendance tonight, we have Ian Copeman from Housing Lynn, and Andy Wood from Rutland County Council will be joining us for item 8. I'll explain in a few moments how the meeting will run in that respect. We also have the following officers in attendance: Ed de Coverley, Chief Executive, Michelle Howard, the Director of Housing and Communities, Clive Tobin, the Assistant Director for Governance and Democracy, Dawn Garden, the Director for Corporate Services, and Chris Flannery, the Assistant Director for Housing, Quality Development and Landlord Services. I assume because that's the longest job title, it's the person with the most work in the room. And in addition, we have the following officers from Democratic Services: Helen Ainge, Democratic Services Officer, and Sarah Evans, Democratic Services Officer. So I suspect we've got some quite meaty and important items on the agenda tonight with such an attendance. Right, I'll now move on to the agenda proper. Firstly, apologies for absence. The only apology I've received is from Councillor Cliff, and having done a quick count around the room, I think everybody else is present. So welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. Item 2 is to confirm the minutes of the scrutiny meeting held on 23rd of September 2025. Before I move to a vote, does anyone wish to raise any issues of accuracy regarding those minutes? No. Okay, could I have a proposer and a seconder to approve the minutes, please? Councillor Thwaites and Councillor Holmes, sorry. It's been a long afternoon. Okay, can I just have a show of hands to approve the minutes, please? Those in favour? Thank you. Next item is the response tracker. We're coming on to that. That's the next item on the agenda, Councillor Gordon. And so, you're ahead of me as usual. So we have the response tracker attached to the papers for the meeting. Forgive me if I just scroll up to it. As per usual, there are currently 2 items on the response tracker. One is relating to the asset management plan for corporate assets, and I'm not sure, have we had that? We're still waiting for that response from the Director for Place and Prosperity, are we not?
Yeah, I believe the director is still liaising with our legal colleagues, but we'll follow that up on her return from leave.
And the second item on the response on the tracker was the query raised about Section 106 monies, and you'll see here there's confirmation that the Auditing Standards Committee have actually agreed to take that matter on board and look into it, so it is being followed up. Are there any other issues relating to the response tracker that I've not just covered? Okay, thank you. Can I then move on to item 4, which is declarations of interest? Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, it's on the number 8, local government reorganisation. I'm a council flat tenant and I will leave the meeting should anything on this come up.
take advice, but I wouldn't have thought there were, thank you for declaring that interest, but I wouldn't have thought it invalidated your attendance for that item.
So you're saying I can stay in for that if anything comes up? Brilliant. Okay.
Councillor Thwaites.
Chair, with your indulgence, this is where I would normally declare, as I have previously when relevant, a non-pecuniary interest in my association with the Friends of Gretton Court in respect of the Older Persons Housing Review, a report that I've been asking for elements of for a long time. This report has been declared an exempt item on the basis that it may be possible to identify tenants or members of staff in the report. That said, having a non-pecuniary interest in the completely volunteer group that has no financial connection or operational responsibility for Gretton Court would not normally be a problem. For clarity, the key purpose of Friends of Gretton Court is to be a conduit for the tenants and their families to relay as a group their comments and issues to the multi-layer complex management structure at Gretton Court. The secondary purpose is to enrich the environment and life experience for the tenants and families at Gretton Court through events such as the coffee morning this Saturday. And everybody is invited to that coffee morning as normal, once the first Saturday of every month. Please come along and chat to the residents and their families. Friends of Gretton Court also produced them and maintain the memorial and sensory garden at the front of Gretton Court. However, it was decided by the Director of Housing and the Monitoring Officer to proactively review the status of Friends of Gretton Court, and it has been decided to reclassify the Friends of Gretton Court as an other registrable interest, using the definition, and I quote, any body, one whose principal purposes include the influence of public opinion or policy, which interestingly includes political parties. This continues, where a matter arises at a meeting which directly relates to the well-being of one of your other registrable interests, you cannot remain in the room. I admit that within the voluntary group's constitution, there is a commitment to support and promote the valued social service provided by Extra Care, a service that fills a huge gap between being able to live independently in a safe community and needing to have full-time care. I would like members to consider that for a moment. As a councillor, we endure this role of representing our wards and the borough, coming to meetings multiple days and evenings a week, and for example, this meeting alone, reading over 300 pages of complex documentation so that we are prepared. We do that because we care about the place we live in. That means we will inevitably be involved in different groups and even sought to contribute to those groups. How can we advocate for the community if we are gagged for doing that? I've made strong representations for this decision to be changed, or for a dispensation to be given to me to be involved in this and future meetings. Those have been refused. Further clarification has also been added that I would be in breach of the code of conduct if I even discuss the restricted document with any of you, because that would be construed as lobbying. However, I will draw people's attention to the members' question I've placed in next week's full council meeting. I am now awaiting to understand what recourse I have on the decisions to exclude me from this meeting. It is true that I was offered a private meeting with the Assistant Director to give my views, but that does not, in my view, contribute to the open and transparent working that this scrutiny function, Cabinet and administration strives for. It was also suggested that I simply resign from the Friends of Gretton Court, but is that morally what I'm being asked to do after 15 years of involvement? Therefore, I very reluctantly will be leaving the room for this item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thwaites. I mean, and I will say I have spoken with Councillor Thwaites. We received advice from the monitoring officer regarding the declaration of this interest and the restrictions it places on him. As chair of the committee, I'm bound to accept the advice and direction of the monitoring officer, but I would want to record that it's raised concerns with me in the way that people's associations with community groups and other activities might impact on their ability to carry out their functions as a councillor, and it may well be a matter for further discussion. But having said that, the advice of the monitoring officer and the direction is clear and will be abided by. as is required under the appropriate code of conduct and our constitution. But thank you for clarifying your position. Are there any other declarations of interest that need to be made tonight by any members? Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Holmes.
I just wanted to say I quite understand how difficult this is. We have to live by these rules, and I don't always think that they are appropriate, but we have to, and I have great sympathy with Councillor Swaits.
Councillor Holmes. Any other, I'll repeat myself, I think it was a no. Any other declarations that people need to make? Sorry, I'll now move on to item 5, which is the standing item review of the forward plan. Are there any items on the forward plan that members wish to raise? Right. So item 6 is the review of the Scrutiny work programme. Again, this is a standing item. I think I need to draw your attention specifically to one matter which relates to the programmed item for our meeting on the 27th of November, which is a review of the business case for the doctor's surgery. Obviously, we set that in the programme in the spring of this year, when at that time we as far as we were aware, the proposal to accommodate a doctor's surgery in either Parkside or more recently Phoenix House was still a live proposition. I think all members will be aware that the Integrated Care Board has recently announced that it's deferring any consideration for another 2 years, as a result of which the business case for a doctor's surgery has become less urgent, shall we say, in terms of this council. You know, not the case for a doctor's surgery, but the business case for using our premises, because clearly there's going to be no progress from the health board. So at the moment, I've had some discussion with the officers. We'll be looking at what we will be bringing forward for that meeting, but clearly the original item as scheduled is kind of out of date now. Councillor Holmes, you want to comment on?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't go to Melton surgery, but I understand there are so few doctors there now. Before you have this meeting on the 27th, would it be possible to find out why there are so few doctors actually at Latham House? Because if we want another doctor's surgery, which is put on the back burner, I understand, but surely if we've only got a few doctors, if there are only a few doctors at Latham House, then surely don't we want to know why? Because if we can't get, you understand where I'm coming from, I think.
I mean, I understand. As I said, there's 2 separate issues here. One is, as a council, obviously, it's not within our gift to either deliver or create health services, doctors' surgeries or otherwise. Our only role in this was as a facilitator in trying to assist the health service in identifying premises, and we bent over backwards as a council, in my view, to do that. In terms of the number of doctors at Latham House, that's a legitimate question to, you know, the health service, I think, and to the Latham House practice. And I'm not sure what the best route for raising that with them is. I don't know whether any advice or guidance you can give on that, Michelle.
So one of the things that I think we need to do is make sure that we don't create any overlap with other meetings that are happening. So what I am aware of is that county councillors are intending to explore the issue through the Health Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Holmes, which is where a discussion like that would take place. And then separately, we've got some internal discussions with colleagues in the health service. So with your permission, it's something I'm happy to follow up with you outside of this chair, and then support around the work programme and how that might shape up.
Any other comments about the work programme? Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, just regarding what you've just mentioned about the second doctor's surgery. In any sort of having a look into this, how far can we actually scrutinise how much money the ICB have had over the years for a doctor's surgery, which I think they've had enough, and they still haven't got the money. Can we look into that further, or is our sort of like remit sort of very sort of like restricted in that way? That's the first thing. Second one, item, just regarding the item in the press last week, I think it was, regarding like housing, like supplementary charges from, I think it's 2020 and 2021, which some of the residents on St John's Court don't seem to be happy about. Has that now been resolved? And I know at the time it was, all the charges were completely frozen for 1 year, but then there was a review, but it seems to be dragging on. So all I'm asking is, I don't want to create loads of time, but could we have an update on this in a housing update meeting? I know we just had one a couple of weeks ago, but in the one after, perhaps, Chair. That's all for now. Thank you.
I mean, thank you, Councillor. I mean, obviously, as Chair of Scrutiny, I feel all powerful, but I don't spread across all those activities. It's not necessarily part of our remit here to deal with that. In terms of the health, I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. I think people will be aware that the subject of, for instance, how Section 106 money is apportioned has become, live recently, and that's been the discussion. But in terms of the wider financing of the health service, that's a matter for them. I think at the moment they're unlikely to accept an invitation to come before our scrutiny committee, given the current state of things. On the other matter, I don't know if there was comment on the St John's Court one.
Thank you. So, Councillor Lumley, I think you're referring to something in media around service charging more generally. So it wouldn't be appropriate for us to look into individual complaints in this committee, for you to look into those. In terms of the wider service charge policy, very happy to share that with committee members. And if that's something that members wanted to consider in more detail as part of the work programme review, I can't see a particular issue with that. But yeah, would not want to be drawn on a specific complaint, because we will do that with that through different processes. But very happy to share with you the policies and procedures that we work to in terms of service charging. I can circulate those, and happy for that to be on the action tracker.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, no, it was. I wasn't referring to one individual complaint. I believe it was actually back in that it was every communal area with council housing communal area had these charges. So I think it's actually all around the borough as opposed to one. I know the article did actually mention St John's Court, but I think back in the day it actually related to the whole borough. So yeah,
but I think that point is, and we could return to the work programme, which is actually the agenda item, if we may. Are there any other items to be raised under the work programme? Okay, thank you. I'll then move on to item 7, which is the it's the older person's housing. Before I move on to item 7, actually, I said I just referred to the structure of tonight's meetings. We've got the 2 main items on the agenda with the very substantial reports attached to each one. The second item, local government reorganisation, we're going to be joined by a colleague from Rutland County Council, who's I think the can I call it a consortium expert, on finance. He's currently attending the Harborough District Scrutiny Committee. That's why I can't be physically here. So when we've concluded this item, we'll have a 5-minute break or so. Just make sure that everything's lined up in terms of joining us remotely, and then we can proceed with that item. Okay, item 7 on the agenda. Now I have to read this very precisely because for legal requirements. The Scrutiny Committee is to receive a report on the outcome of the review of older persons' housing. The appendix to this report contains information relating to various housing schemes within the Council's housing stock. By implication, that information identifies various residents and staff members, and although any proposals are still under development, it is potentially harmful to make information public which suggests any course of action should be taken which could affect those individuals. The information concerned falls within paragraph 2 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and I therefore believe it is in the public interest for this agenda item to be considered in the absence of the public, and I hereby move that the committee should make a resolution to that effect. So I'm moving that as a resolution. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Gordon. So, with a mover and a seconder, I will move to a vote just by show of hands. Those in favour of the resolution, please show. Thank you. That is passed. We will now be moving into private session in a few moments. Okay, welcome back to tonight's meeting of the Scrutiny Committee. We now move on to item 8 on the agenda, which is local government reorganisation, review of the draft proposal. And we've had a report circulated before tonight. I'm sure we've all read it from start to finish. It was only, what, 300 pages. I have read it, actually. I'm sad enough. So I think, Ed, are you going to lead off on this? And we have, I should actually welcome, is it Alan Woods? Andy, sorry, I'm terrible with names. Andy Wood, who's joining us online. So welcome, Andy, if you can hear me.
Thank you very much. Hi all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, just we'll just get the presentation onto the main slideshow. Yeah, thank you, and thank you, members, for the opportunity to hopefully continue the conversation that we've been having about local government reorganisation over the course of this year. We've obviously had a number of briefings, and there was a workshop, if you recall, of the Scrutiny Committee back in June. So this is an opportunity now to consider what is the draft submission that has been drawn together by 8 councils, so the 7 district and borough councils alongside Rutland County Council. As the Chair mentioned, I'm going to do and provide an introductory presentation to some of the key themes and propositions in the current proposal, and then I will invite Andy to speak to the financial case, and Andy will introduce himself more fully and speak to the process that he's been through working alongside Dawn, our 151 officer, and the other 151 officers across the districts and Rutland. We're also joined by a number of senior colleagues with me today who, as we move into questions, will be able to assist with any inquiries that you might have. So just on the slide at the moment is a reminder really of the process that we've been through ever since December last year. Various stages, you will recall submission of interim plans in March, and there were 3 submitted. As you can see, the feedback was received by government in June. As I mentioned, we had a workshop of the Scrutiny Committee in June as well. We then undertook a period, and was actually a further period of public engagement in June and July. And then we're working towards now a deadline of the 28th of November for this year for the submission of the final proposal. The purpose really of the sessions tonight, and these are being mirrored across all the 8 councils involved in the partnership, is to receive feedback from members on the draft, and then to consider that with our leaders and cabinets during the course of November, and consider what amendments, updates, improvements we can make to our submission prior to it then being finalised and then formally considered by our cabinet on the 19th of November, prior to, as I say, that submission date on the 28th. In terms of the structure of the submission before you, as the chair mentioned, it is a lengthy document, it is a substantial document, but it needs to be, because it needs to cover a lot of ground. You can see there and hopefully recognise that it's broken into 5 sections, a reflection on how we approach the challenge that government laid before us, an options appraisal that the government encouraged us to consider, and really there are a breakdown between 2 and 3 unitary council options, and I'll touch on that a little more fully in a moment. Then an introduction to the proposal that we are making for what we call locally as North City South. And then what you will see is a comprehensive review against all of the 6 design principles that we've used to evaluate the options, how we collaborate and engage with residents and stakeholders, and then some consideration of transition and the implementation plan, and that was touched on briefly in the last item. So in terms of the approach we've taken, we very much sought to adopt a collaborative approach and work with partners to seek consensus. And I think the fact that there are 8 councils taking this proposition through their governance processes hopefully is testament to that desire to work together. There has certainly been a key emphasis that has played out and been a recurring theme through this year, is about how we bring forward a proposition that best facilitates the benefits of devolution and the funding and powers that will come from government as a consequence of that. Another consideration we've tried to weigh as we've gone through this process is how we get the right balance between scale, so the benefits of making things larger, but also how do you remain connected with communities and make sure councils operate in a way that people live their lives. We've sought to base judgments, and certainly our leaders have considered things on the basis of evidence and data. And we've also sought to get the balance right between risk and making sure that the vulnerable are supported through any change. And one of the phrases you'll hear me and others refer to is making sure that on day one, the first day of a new council, we are safe and legal, but also that we use this as an opportunity to transform local government and build the foundations of more effective local government. And the phrase again that you will hear us use is, and the mantra and kind of vision we are using to focus on as part of this process, is the idea of resetting, reinvigorating and reimagining public services. So the options that we considered, you can see before you 5 options, as I mentioned, really a blend of 2 or 3 unitaries for Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and different configurations of boundaries in relation to particularly the City Council, who, if you recall, when they submitted their interim bid, included an expansion to the city boundaries, and that's been something that government has asked us to consider as we've gone through this process. And that's those 5 options just mapped graphically for you so you can get a sense of what they look like. The design principles, oh, there we go, that I referred to, sorry, jumping one ahead. The design principles I referred to are a blend of the government criteria, so the things that government has asked us to evaluate our proposals through, plus also the missions that they have established for driving the economy forward particularly. So we want to try to respond as an area both on what government's mandated, but also what it aspires to do. So we go beyond just a focus on compliance, and you'll see front and centre in the first principle that we have used to evaluate options is around unlocking devolution, followed secondly by ensuring propositions support economic growth, housing and infrastructure, then very much a clear focus on efficiency and sustainability, and we know finances are a key driver for the government. Then making sure that any services or any services that the new councils provide are sufficiently of high quality, but also focused on prevention and demand, particularly in services like adults and children's social care, special educational needs and homelessness as well, of course, are rising exponentially, and that is creating real pressure on not just our services, but the services across the whole public sector system. There's also a key focus on making sure, as I touched on earlier, that whatever we do, however large we go, that any future councils can maintain and protect the identity and diversity of our communities, so that place identities and that which makes places like Melton special as opposed to other places in the county special are protected and validated through any new arrangements. And then finally, a focus on democratic accountability. So clearly these organisations and this council as it stands at the moment have a key role in ensuring democracy is preserved locally, and we need to make sure that any future councils undertake that role as effectively, if not better. So in terms of the proposal, as I've mentioned, the one that has been identified and chosen as the preferred option by our leaders and is presented for your consideration this evening, and ultimately we'll work through our processes, is for 3 unitary councils across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, 1 for the north, 1 for the south and 1 for the city. And there's a few rational reasons there why that has been the choice that's been made. 3 equally sized councils, all of about 400,000, the ability to bring forward devolution, accelerate economic growth, provide neighbourhood prevention and focused services, deliver savings, but also create a sustainable footprint for the future. And ultimately as well, this proposal, for reasons I'll describe a little more fully in a moment, seeks to maintain the city council boundaries as they stand at the moment. So just turning to the first area of that, there is, and this is something we've heard from stakeholders and business partners throughout this process, a fair amount of frustration about the absence of devolution for Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. Many of our neighbouring community areas across the East Midlands and the West Midlands too, and Peterborough and Cambridgeshire to the south, they are already benefiting from devolution arrangements from the powers and funding that government is passporting through those mayoral strategic authorities, and we at this point are not. And business is keen for us to progress with that. So we have tried to think about what kind of configuration best suits the ability to bring forward a new strategic authority, and we think 3 well-balanced unitary councils is the most effective partnership mechanism to work with a strategic authority, and having a strategic authority operating across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, supported by 3 equally sized unitary councils, creates the right balance and blend between strategic at the regional level and the operational delivery by the unitary councils. Our proposition and our ask of government is that they will allow us to bring forward devolution proposals concurrently with local government reorganisation, such that we would have mayoral elections in 2027, and that would enable the powers and funding to come forward to this area at the earliest possible timescale. And what we've seen through independent analysis that's been undertaken as part of this process is that because of the nature of the distinct economic geographies across the north, the city and the south, that those are best served by 3 distinct organisations that can tailor strategies to deliver for those particular sectors, given that our area is not one size fits all, and ultimately the best way to unlock growth is to make sure that you're working most closely with those areas and those sectors that are going to deliver for your area, rather than try and spread a more generic approach across a wider area. So that is something that has come clearly through the analysis that we've done as part of this process. Again, I've mentioned the idea that we want to get this balance right between scale and being close to our communities, and you can see there the breakdown in populations, and I'll touch more on the council numbers in a moment. But what we've tried to identify is a way in which we can be big enough that benefits from the scale economies that are necessary to create more resilience and more ability to deliver some of the strategic aspirations that we have, but also that still maintains connection. And we intend to deliver that connection through the establishment of neighbourhood partnerships and what we call our neighbourhood prevention model. And this picks up the point that I made earlier around demand in the care system being exponentially growing, and frankly there being too many children and adults currently in the care system, and that at this stage being unsustainable. And therefore there has to be a move for public sectors, or for public services more generally, to become sustainable. We have to move to an earlier intervention and prevention model that ultimately allows us to work with people in a way that will help them be healthier for longer and live more independent lives, and ultimately reduce demand and cost on the system. So what we are proposing to facilitate that is the creation of these neighbourhood partnerships. There will be 9 to 10 of these across each of the unitaries, population give or take 50,000, and as far as possible mirroring the existing neighbourhood structures in the health system, so it increases alignment with our partners and therefore makes partnership working more effective. We would have partnerships that would draw together key stakeholders. So obviously ward members would have a key role in leading those partnerships, working alongside parish councils, the service area teams that are embedded in those areas, and then our health partners, police, fire, voluntary and community sector, and there would be a coordination function that doesn't currently exist that we would put in place to bring those various partner agencies together to help drive more effective working. They would together create neighbourhood and community plans and ultimately work on building tailored and integrated service delivery. So again, we would have the benefits of scale, but the ability to adapt, we would hope and expect services into neighbourhoods which may be distinct from services provided here, may be distinct from those provided in other areas, again, given the local nature of what each area needs. And Andy will touch on this in the financial modelling presentation shortly, but by investing 27 million, so a sizable investment per year into prevention, we project and our model suggests we could save 91 million by year 10. And as I say, Andy will touch on that a little more fully in a moment. I already mentioned as well the importance of the operating model and ensuring that we are safe and legal from day one. And it is certainly true to say that the impacts of aggregation, so the requirement to bring services from the districts together, so whether that's housing, planning, or any other service provided by the districts currently, they will need to be amalgamated to increase the scale and coordination of those operating at the new unitary level. But equally, for those services currently operating at a county level, there will be a requirement to disaggregate them and essentially split them into smaller chunks to be able to facilitate and operate within the new council footprint. And there are risks associated with that, as well as opportunities, and they are set out in the paper. And we have sought to learn from sector experts on that. We obviously have social care authorities and a unitary council working alongside us. And there's been a number of research papers provided by Empower, the staff college as well, which are referenced in the document and have helped us learn how to manage that process effectively. But certainly it should not be underestimated, but we would seek to draw on expertise to assist with that. As well as being safe and legal from day one, as I mentioned, we want to create the foundations for future transformation, and that too is set out in the paper for your consideration. I mentioned briefly earlier on around democracy. So what we've sought to do is look at the appropriate level of representation in these new councils. Government has made clear they want to streamline the democratic processes as well, whilst maintaining appropriate representation. You can see there what we've tried to do is model what is a reasonable level of representation. So the new councils would have 72 councillors for the north, 54 is the existing number of councillors for the city, and then 70 for the South Leicestershire. But obviously that does lead to a reduction overall in the number of councillors that there are currently across the 10 councils that are across LLR as we stand at the moment. You may recall that we are obliged, or the new councils will be obliged to move to a leader and cabinet model. That is something that government is going to mandate through the new legislation. But we have also, as part of our model, committed to retain service centres in each of the major towns. So maintaining that commitment to accessibility for our communities to be able to access services in places like Melton and other major settlements. Town and parish councils will also be a key partner in this process. Obviously, Melton as a place as a borough is parished extensively, but does not have a town council currently. One of the considerations that the council will need to consider as part of this process is whether to initiate what's called a community governance review, and that is where you can go through a process and subject to that process potentially create a town council for Melton Mowbray itself, and that's something that we may wish to consider as part of this process. And as I mentioned, they would be parish council would be part of the neighbourhood partnerships. There's no decision yet about what ward boundaries would be for these new councils. That's something we'll follow in due course. And I mentioned earlier on that if we are to establish the devolution agreements at the pace that we are proposing, that would take place in May 27 for the elections would take place in May 27 for the mayor, and subject to government's view on the proposal, the elections for the shadow unitary councils would take place in May 2027 as well, and that would then lead to the first actual council, what's called vesting day, the first day of the new unitaries being April 2028. Again, I won't speak too much to this because Andy will speak a lot more about the finances. There's just a summary of some of the key metrics in terms of finance around both efficiency savings and then the longer term sustainability. So I won't steal any of Andy's thunder. I shall wait for him to speak to that in more detail. And then just to reflect briefly on the engagement work, I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that we undertook some extensive public engagement and conversations with stakeholders during June and July. We had nearly 6,500 responses to that engagement. We had some strong support for the proposition around 3 unitary councils, and nearly 2/3 agreed that they supported the configuration of that 3 unitary approach around the North City South model. There was strong objection both in terms of the free text and in terms of the response to questions around this issue of boundary changes. It is something that was not considered to be particularly positively received as a prospect by residents, particularly those surrounding the area, and that was something that was considered as well in developing our proposal. It also, of course, adds complexity to any proposal that is going to be considered by government, because the moment you start moving boundaries, particularly if you don't use ward boundaries, then there's a very different process that needs to be gone through to be able to make the changes to the new organisations. We are continuing to engage with stakeholders and MPs, and I believe I've seen 2 MPs currently have made public statements of support for the North City South proposition, but we are continuing to talk with others about what the position is and to seek their views and input into the development of proposals. And that brings me on to the financial case. So Andy, I shall hand over to you now. And as I mentioned, I'm happy if you want to just let me know when to move on to the next slide, I shall move you on.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Just to introduce myself, I did 36 years or so in local government finance, the last 8 of which were as the corporate director of finance, which included the Section 151 officer role for Kent County Council. And just to say, in terms of this financial model, all 8 of the 7 districts in Rutland have been very actively engaged. All of the Section 151 officers, there's been a real good level of engagement, and the model is better for the various inputs that they've put into it. So a big thanks to all of the Section 151s. So the key is the second bullet point there on what the model is and what it isn't, but also sharing with you the key assumptions and the results. And obviously, the really important thing is to give you the opportunity to challenge what's been put into the financial model. Next slide, Ed, please. So clearly, we've aligned the numbers to the narrative. The headline is, yes, we get significant savings from reducing 10 councils to 3, which will be no surprise, and there will be transition costs associated with that move. But in terms of the sustainability aspect of this, you can see the bullet points there. It's worth saying that Ed touched on the fact that there's a 44 million saving from LGR, that works out at 1.9% of the overall budget across Leicestershire. Bearing in mind the budget gaps that are currently in all of the MTFSs of the councils is 146 million for 27-28. So just doing LGR does nothing to change the metrics on financial sustainability. Something has to change, and I'll come on to that as we move on. Next slide, please, Ed. So over the past decade, the spend on children's services and adult services has put enormous pressure on any authority that's got upper tier responsibilities, not to mention SCND, and certainly in the districts you've had to tackle the growing issue of homelessness. But something fundamentally has to change those demand curves that we've seen come through in the last 10 years or so. 75% roughly, I think it's 73% in Leicestershire of the spend is on children's and adult services. What we can't afford to happen in local government is for that to become 80% and 90%, because there simply wouldn't be any funding left for some of the other statutory services, and certainly nothing for discretionary services. So it's, as it says there, it's a generational opportunity to change, and we believe the North City South proposal does exactly that. Nobody wants children taken away from their parents or carers, and most older people, elderly people, people with disabilities don't want to be removed from their homes. So by investing well and targeted investment, we believe we can improve people's lives and reduce the burden on the council taxpayers in Leicestershire. The final bullet point there, and I will come on to it, is this is a model, and maybe if we move on, Ed, please. It's a series of assumptions, and they are assumptions. They're not proposals. I'll come on to a slide shortly about what the model is, but it does show one variation of a possible sustainable model. It's heavily factored into prevention, because that's the whole kind of logic of where we go to change demand. But essentially, it's one of, we could have done 30 different models, all with slight variations. Clearly, that isn't possible in the time we've got, or actually of any real useful purpose. So we demonstrate that those budget gaps that the authorities are showing for 7-8 now will be turned with some success by 37-38. Next slide, please, Ed. So the model, it's not asking for any decisions about the future. As you will be very aware, the decisions about things like council tax increases, the level of services, the hours opening times of libraries, all of those things will be for the new authority and initially the shadow authorities. So this isn't saying here's how you should do it, or here's our recommendations. It's one possibility, and clearly forecasting out to 2037-38 is not going to have a high degree of accuracy. It can't possibly have. As Dawn would tell you, writing a 3-year MTFS that stands the test of time is tricky enough. We're trying to do 10 years, and we're 2.5 years away from vesting day. So let's not pretend that the numbers are are going to prove accurate as we go through. But what we have done is build them on what we believe is sensible assumptions. So the model isn't set in policy. It's not a high risk one. It's not overly ambitious. We think we've got the balance right, as we'll demonstrate in a few slides' time. And it's not assuming that residents will have to continue to face 5% council tax increases as they have for the last umpteen years. The model is based on 3 years of 5% and then 7 years of 3. And it most certainly is not a budget or setting the financial strategy for the next 10 years. Next, so we've done what MHCLG asked, which makes a lot of sense, of course. So focusing on the financial efficiencies from the reorganisation, but also the financial sustainability. Now, those two merge to some degree. They're not totally separate entities, and there are some things that we know the county would probably challenge us on, saying that's you've included income equalisation as part of LGR. You could do that anyway, and our argument is, well, actually, no, you probably couldn't. But it's in a way it's irrelevant, because whether you do it as an efficiency or as a sustainability option makes no difference to the bottom line. So looking at the financial efficiencies first, Ed, if we can. Phase 1 had the March submission had 43 million in. We've reviewed in a lot of detail those calculations. As it happens, it's come out very close to phase 1, and you can see the headline savings there. Employees would result in the deletion of about 450 posts initially, but the neighbourhood prevention teams will need feet on the street. So we're estimating approximately half of the spending will be on staff, and therefore about 230 new posts would be created and the opportunity would be there for the posts that are deleted for retraining into the new neighbourhood teams. Procurement savings are a very modest 5% initially on the existing district and Rutland spend. It doesn't take into account savings that could be achieved by bringing the county into the equation. Income equalisation, basically we've said we need to level the charges that the residents face in the differing councils. So the classic example is green waste collection. I think the highest rate is £61. The lowest is a free service. And as I say, the county may argue this isn't to do with efficiencies, but it's important that we look at it from the perspective of the authority who don't charge for green waste collection have decided that they don't have to. So why would you charge residents extra if actually you don't need to? So and part of that reason is because they haven't had the pressure of adult services, children's services, SEND, etc., etc. So we believe it's an important part of being equitable to the residents in the same way that council tax harmonisation is a key issue. We'll come on to that shortly. We are targeting a capital receipt of 75 million, of which 40 million we would repay debt, and the balance is set aside to pay for the transition costs. 75 million is only 15% of our other land and property assets as defined in the statement of account. So that's a modest target, but what's really, really crucial is that we don't enter into any fire sales. So we will take our time. we have set aside £1 million for external support to come up with a programme. And as Ed has said, there will still be locality buildings for residents. So this isn't about closing off any particular assets, closing down any particular offices. This is a really well thought through capital disposal programme that we can't sit here now and say we know which assets we think we should put into the mix. We will require some expert support to do that. Next slide, please, Ed. We've currently estimated the transition costs at around 20 million. Although we will lose 450 odd posts, we expect 230 new posts, and government are very, very clear that they expect us to manage the redundancy costs wherever possible. So that might mean holding vacancies, it might mean retraining the staff, it might well mean using agency staff where we can't hold vacancies throughout the period. Of the 20 million, a significant element is on the redundancy side. So we've settled for estimating the number of redundancies at 150, and because of there's a proportion of that will be at the senior level, we've averaged the cost per redundancy as an average at 80,000, which would include the pension strain for people who would be entitled to full pension before their actual retirement age. That number, of course, we can't predict what that number will be because we don't know what staff may end up being redundant and what their age and salary and length of service would be. Next slide, please, Ed. The other costs are the very first stage of IT harmonisation. We've taken advice from chief execs who've been through this previously, and the very clear advice is don't try and get all your systems aligned from day one. It's too high risk. Take your time, do it properly, and make sure you've got a coordinated program. So the initial costs at 3 million, and then we've got the aggregation and disaggregation issues. So we've got a budget of about 3 million plus just over 2 million for to bring in consultants on the issues that may be difficult to unpick. This is one of the figures we're currently reviewing. We think we probably need to increase that a bit as part of our due diligence and as part of the feedback we've had from the other 5 scrutiny committees that we've had so far. And there is a contingency against that 20 million. So if we've got that badly wrong, we've got a contingent pot to help us cover that. Equally, it could be less. Next, please, Rob. So then what we've tried to do is having modelled some potential savings and costs of the immediate restructure. It's then how does that change the landscape? Because as I said, it only saves 1.9% of the bottom line, and it's nowhere near. It's less than a third of the total budget gaps that the authorities are currently predicting for 27-28. We know it won't be that because you have to set a legal budget every year, but there are ways to do that. You can either make your revenue income meet your revenue expenditure, or there's a gap and you say, but I've got plenty in reserves and I'll use reserves to balance the budget, which is quite common, and it's been very common in the last 3 or 4 years. So reserves have dropped. The thing to say for Leicestershire is, of the 21 areas who are going through LGR, Leicestershire, as a proportion of their revenue budget, have got the lowest debt and the highest reserves. So we go into it from a very strong basis, which gives opportunity for A, to use reserves if we have to, and B, to invest through prudential borrowing if we have to. So we're in a strong position, stronger than the other 20 areas who are going into this. Some have got enormous debts, and you'd have heard of the Surrey decision yesterday, which we believe includes writing off 500 million of debt from one of the borough councils. The investment in prevention, if you target the investment to the right the right people, the right residents, the right service users, you will get a return somewhere in the region of anywhere between £4 and £8 on children's services. The figure for adults is £3.17 that came out of a joint report from ADAS, the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, and Newton Europe, and I believe the LGA were involved as well. So it's a nationally recognised rate of return, but you've got to target it. If you target it really well, you can get more than that. Equally, if it's not targeted, you will get less. So it's really important that is targeted investment, and we use really good data to make sure that is being invested in a way that will give us the returns. Big question is, how quick can you get those returns back? And we've modelled that to say it won't be immediate, but some of it will be a quick return. So that's all set out in the model, in the 64 pages of finance appendix, if you've got that far in your reading. We've factored in 100 million of prudential borrowing to make sure our property estate and IT estate is or will be fit for purpose. If we're going to release some capital receipts, it's important that we reinvest in existing buildings. We might need to repurpose some of our buildings. We may need to make some of them multi-use. The short answer is we don't know. That's why we'd need to bring in some expertise. But we do know that over time, we will need to invest significantly in our IT applications and systems and hardware to make the best efficient use of both the existing applications, but also then to take advantage of AI as we start to develop our approach to using AI more than we have so far. Final bullet point, by merging the existing housing revenue accounts, and I say this not from any level of expertise, but we got a guy in who is an expert in these matters, and he's looked at the HRAs and said, if you do these certain things and reduce some of your management costs, you would have headroom to build another 1,150 family homes for social rent, which is clearly part of the prevention agenda. Good quality, affordable housing is really important to the prevention agenda. Next slide, please, Rob. So, Ed, sorry. So these are some graphs that shows for the north, it break even on the model would be about year 4, 2031, 32, and then you start to generate some surpluses based on a 3% council tax rate, but there are other factors in that, of course. And it's probably good to quickly go to the next one, which is the city, who break even quicker. Partly that is due to fair funding. You'd have heard the proposed changes to fair funding. We've also heard, however, that the London councils have made inroads to their case, which might mean the numbers we've crunched based on fair funding that we expect to happen as it is at the moment could change again. But the city do well, so they break even quicker than the north and the south, partly because of fair funding. And then the next one is the south, which break even again around that year 3, year 4. So the north and south have got fairly similar trajectories. Next one, please. So I said we think we've got a sensible set of assumptions, and one of the ways we test that is say, okay, what are your risks and opportunities? And if your risks far outweigh your opportunities, then you've probably been very optimistic in your set of assumptions, and vice versa. If your opportunities are big and there are no real financial risks, it says you've been too pessimistic. So you can see the headline of the risks and opportunities. Without doubt, the biggest risk is inflation, and I say that because it's the biggest number that goes into the financial model. Over 10 years, we would have added 640 million for inflation across the 10 years. That's based on Bank of England forecast rates of 2%, their target rate. So if inflation was to run at 3%, you're going to have to add another 300 million into your model. And that would be huge. And the biggest worry for any model is if you look at the list of risks and opportunities that are there, all but inflation is either influenced by or controlled by the 3 councils. Inflation is largely out of our gift. So not only is it the biggest number, it's also the thing that you can do least about. So there are risks and opportunities. We are updating that. We're doing the sensitivity analysis. We couldn't quite get it done in time for when we publish this on the 20th, but you will see it in the final version. Thanks, Rob. Ed, sorry. So if you look at that, if I put my glasses on, I might even be able to read it. So if all of the risks came to bear every year, we would be 300 million plus short on the model. On the other hand, if all of the opportunities came to pass, we'd be 350 million better off each year by 2037, 38. So the purple line is the net figure. Of course, some risks are also opportunities, so they can't both happen. But it illustrates that what we've done, we believe, is to set a series of sensible assumptions in building out the 10-year model. Next one, Ed, please.
Thanks, Andy.
So,
I think are you finishing on this slide and then back to me?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the savings, as we say, 44 million. But in terms of the overall sustainability, it's a drop in the ocean to what's needed to change the spending profiles that we've seen over the last few years. We believe we've done that by saying we'll invest in prevention, And as I say, it's the model we put in front of you for debate is just one of a whole series that we could have put in front of you. And just to reiterate, it's not a statement of policy. It's not suggesting that council tax should go up by those rates. It will be different potentially in the north and the south, but the assumptions are there for you to look at and to challenge. But please also bear in mind that there are significant risks and opportunities, as there would be for if you're setting a model out to 2037, 38. So back to you, Ed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. So just to wrap up from me then. So this is clearly a complex area of policy. There is a lot of detail to get into, obviously, in a report, and Andy set some of that out today. What we have sought to try to do is to respond to this challenge with no limitations on our ambition, because I think if all this is just a cost-cutting exercise and a protection of the existing structures and systems, then we will have missed an opportunity to reset how local government works, because this only happens once in a generation. So it is important, I think, that we don't limit our ambition and we make sure that whatever we do, we maximise the potential to create better and more sustainable services for the future, which is not an easy task. So there is no limit to our ambition. What there is, though, hopefully, and Andy has sought to describe this, is pragmatism and detail underpinning some of that ambition around how we manage the finances, how we model the finances, and how we try to make sure that whatever comes forward in future is prudent and measured and balanced and gets the right blend between those risks and opportunities. So that is what we've sought to work through and share with you tonight. But as Andy says, we really welcome your comments, your contributions, your challenges, your questions, because they will help us refine and improve this prior to submission. Just final slide then, a reminder on the key dates. Obviously, we have a council meeting next week where this will be a matter of further debate. We have the cabinet meeting on the 19th of November, as I said, and then submission to government before the 28th. We anticipate that the government consultation on proposals will take place in the spring next year, and the government would make a decision likely before the summer recess in July next year. And again, as was described earlier on, once we get through the process of submitting proposals, we're then into the process, whatever choice is made by the government. This council will have a key role to play along with all the others in developing the transition and implementation phase, and that would obviously take place over the next couple of years. So on that point, Chair, I shall finish and hand back to you. Thank you very much.
The first thing I was actually going to say, firstly, thank you to Ed and to Andy for the presentation and obviously the report we have in front of us. Just to point out, we're now at 12 minutes past 9, which means we're 18 minutes away from having to pass a resolution to continue, because we'll hit the 3-hour rule for meetings. I don't propose to curtail discussion, so I hope that if we're still talking at that time, then we'll agree to continue. But equally, if you've got nothing to say, that's okay as well. Yeah, I understand that. Okay, so over to yourselves, Councillor Chubb.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that presentation. I remain open-minded at the moment, but I notice for option 1, the 2 unitaries, particularly in the report, page 188, there are various comments made in the comparing to the other options. Quite a lot of them are negative, and I quote, resulting demand and resource imbalance will significantly undermine the ability for alignment, collaboration and an effective partnership. It goes on to say that a single unitary for the county and Rutland may struggle to respond effectively to the county's vast and diverse geography of market towns. Furthermore, it says it's also likely to result in a more standardised approach which does not recognise the economic diversity of the area and risks inhibiting the growth of small and medium-sized enterprises. I won't go on, but obviously the key difference between option 1 and option 4 obviously being for the 3 unitaries, seems to be my understanding, and I have read the report, so there's a lot to take on board, is the population difference. And I think option 1 is 815,000, whereas picking up for the northern section, it's 400,000. What I'm struggling to understand is that both are extensive and diverse areas, particularly in this day and age, when we have greater use of online provision and connectivity, plus the reference made to neighbourhood partnerships. Why option 1, there should be these kind of negative comments? I would have thought that option 1, again, in terms of the difference, is very little. However, I remain to be convinced, and again, without the benefit of being able to compare both options fully, and really getting to grip with the savings, I'm struggling, as I said, to see the difference. So welcome any just explanation. Very much.
Thank you, Chair, if I may. So, I mean, there are a number of factors which each of the options have been considered on. So it's not one thing kind of lends itself to being a determinative justification for why the choice should be made. I think what's happened through this process is the options have been looked at by the leaders, by the officers. They've been weighed against those design principles I described at the beginning, and the judgment is ultimately reached based on those factors, based on the things that I've summarised in the presentation, but is covered much more in detail in the report. The best option that gets the most impact against those principles is option 4. Just to pick up on a couple of points to exemplify that point. So there is clearly an argument, and again, this is about how we've approached this. We are looking for the best balance between scale, so making things bigger as we've been asked to do by government, but not doing it to an extent that makes it so large that then you start to risk diseconomies of scale, because as organisations get so big, potentially they become less efficient because they are less able to adapt and flex and deliver to neighbourhoods. So if something is so vast, it is then much harder to relate to the neighbourhood model that we've described. So we think the balance is best struck by having something that is 400,000, still large, no question, but with then those 9-10 neighbourhoods working within them. We think that ratio works more effectively operationally, rather than having something that's approaching 800, 900,000 population, therefore much more difficult, we think, to manage. And certainly if you look at some of the challenges in local government at the moment, they are faced by some of the largest councils in the country. Notably some of the challenges that Birmingham are facing currently may well be to do with their scale, because they are so big and they are the biggest council in the country. So it is often said, but it's not often true, that bigger is better. Bigger has connotations and has practical challenges associated with it as well. The other thing, and particularly in relation to option 1, which is in relation to the single county unitary of 800,000, and then the city council at 350,000, the challenge with that is in relation to the alignment between those two councils and a new strategic authority. So in partnership, having equal partners with similar spending power, similar gravitas, a sense of equality between them, that is the best basis upon which you can build an effective partnership. Having one partner of 800,000, whose budget I suspect will be twice as large as a council that is of 350,000, there is an imbalance in power, and potentially that risks effective partnership working relationships. And with only 2 councils working with a mayor who would be at 1.2 million, there is potentially not a lot of distance between the leader of a council of 800,000 and a mayor responsible for a sub-region of 1.2 million. And the government has made clear they want mayors to have regional, they want mayors to be the primary political architect of strategic delivery in areas. And they've made that clear, and they want to give them power and funding to deliver that. And therefore, we think you want more of a separation between the leaders of unitary councils and the mayor to make sure those relationships are clear, responsibilities are clear, and accountability is clear. So that's why we think that was a better alignment than option one. But there are other reasons which are set out, but that just responds to a couple of the points you've made.
Thank you. Just want to clarify a couple of indications. I think given the first question took 8 minutes, it's probably appropriate to put the resolution to the meeting now before taking the next one as to whether we extend. Could I have a proposal? Do we have to extend for a specific time, Clive?
So you can extend generally, and then theoretically there can be a debate on that before you vote. You can, during that debate, there's a specific provision which says you can amend that proposal to extend beyond 3 but not beyond 4. So that's the only difference that can be made. Otherwise, you can just extend generally.
Would someone be prepared to propose we suspend the requirement to finish at 9:30 and extend the meeting? Councillor Holmes?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as long as I can speak next.
Oh, that's you know that's unfair pressure, but I'll accept that. Can we deal with this first? And yeah. Can I have a seconder to extend the meeting? Thank you. Those in favour? Reluctantly, yeah. Holmes?
I'm at a loss, a total loss. Why, when we are the rural capital of food, Rutland has its totally unique. Market Harborough and around also unique. So why, and I just don't understand it, why isn't it Melton, Rutland and Market Harborough? That's my question.
So the government's been quite clear of its expectations in terms of scale of new unitary councils. So it has said it expects unitary councils to be of the region of 500,000 population, unless there are good reasons why it should be less than that. The proposal we are making is that our 3 unitaries will be around 400,000. And we've set out the reasons why we think there is justification in terms of the relationship as I've described with the strategic authority, the fact that we are a vast rural population, and the fact that in the way Andy described, we can deliver sustainable councils at the scale we are proposing. We think there is sufficient justification for that. The government would not accept, and they've been clear, that a population of the scale that you've described, which would, I suspect, fall below 200,000 population, that would not, based on all the feedback we've had from governments, meet their test of requirements. Therefore, we've had to limit what we can consider as a reasonable outcome based on the criteria the government set. So it simply wouldn't pass the first test of meeting their expectations, unfortunately.
Well, Northwest, are they going to be helping everywhere else? Because Northwest are by far better off than everywhere else, aren't they? They always have been.
So one of the early judgments we had to make, and one of the considerations and choices our leaders made when we were looking at the options, was between a north and south 3 unitary solution or an east and west 3 unitary solution. And there are some compelling reasons why an east and west split might be more helpful in terms of the alignment of some of the things you've described around the alignment we have as a borough with Market Harborough and Rutland, and other places on the east of Leicestershire, which is generally more rural, as opposed to the west. So from a place identity perspective, it's quite compelling. The challenge with it, of course, is what you then have is all the growth assets on the eastern side, and you've described one of them in northwest Leicestershire, and they obviously have the Freeport, they have the airport, and they have the M1 and all the growth corridor that aligns to that. So by having an east-west split, you potentially impoverish the east and put all the growth potential in the west, and that would not be sustainable financially for councils going forward. And therefore, the judgment that was made is actually, in terms of sustainable places and councils, this community and this council is and Leicestershire Rutland generally is best served by having a northwest split, which then has a balance of both urban growth and rural within it, and therefore you have kind of cross support. So each side benefits from the other. The assets, the strengths, and the liabilities and challenges, they are shared out across places that hopefully are more balanced. And that was the judgment that was made ultimately.
Thank you for that. I think it's worth, if I may, you keep saying we, that we includes the political leaderships of all 8 authorities who've been at the centre of this. I just thought make the point. It's not just officers. I'm going to go Councillor Thwaites and then Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. As is normal, I have to simplify things so that I can get my mind around it. And to me, it sort of comes down to a competition between the north-south and we'll call it the donut, the full county. And looking at the savings, because that's got to be one of the biggest objectives of eventually having the savings. Most of the savings we looked at tonight would be the same whichever direction you go in. So I saw nothing tonight that sort of indicates where the north-south model facilitates savings that can't be achieved by the larger organisation. So the difference then becomes between choosing between the two models. Well, what is the transition cost? Now, a lot of those transition costs are going to be the same, whatever you do, because you've got to do. But they do increase greatly when you go north-south, because if you start splitting what is currently a single unitary for schools, highways, etc., 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 you've got an increased transition cost to do that. And after 40 years of working in IT, if you think you can do a transition project like that in 3 million, that I've never seen one that's done that. So if we're trying to sell this solution, the north-south, I don't see those figures selling that. They don't give the benefit from that point of view. You gave the benefit of the numbers, which I can understand. Although there is a counter argument to that is when I looked at when I watched the scrutiny meeting for county council, it's the same number of councillors. So there's an argument to sort of say that the representation that I would get as a resident is going to be the same whichever way it goes, and it's going to go off to a conglomerate somewhere, whether it's in the north or whether it's going to be in Glenfield or wherever it ends up with the future one. So again, I don't see the convincing argument or the argument that we've put forward so far that says this is the one to go for, because there's increased savings even with the massive transition costs that the differences will cause.
Thanks, Chair. If I may just respond to a couple of those points. So I think, so in terms of the efficiency savings, so potentially if you have 2 unitary councils, you will reduce some management overheads as compared to 3 potentially, because you've got 2 organisations rather than 3. Though reality with bigger organisations, you'll have more middle managers, so therefore, yeah, it's not as easy to say that there is a third more costs with 3 than there are 2. That would be an oversimplification. I think the point that Andy made was important though, which is the savings made in efficiency of the initial restructure of the organisations is a relatively small amount of money in the context of the opportunity to design and build something that is much more fundamentally effective at the grassroots level, at a neighbourhood level, where you are frankly, using a lot more of your resources on the front line in a more effective way. And I think the argument that the 8 councils are preferring, and I just defer to the point that Mike made, that this is a politically led process, which is absolutely right, and we are facilitating it. And it's not designed to be a sales pitch. It's designed to be a consideration of some complex matters. And there's not a black and white answer. It's a matter of judgment and degree. But the position that as 8 councils we have resolved is that we are better served evidentially by what we've seen from other places, by councils that are sufficiently large enough to be more resilient, but not so large that they do become then more distant. And that is an organisational reality. And you lose then the ability to integrate services. And regrettably, we aren't doing some of this now. And actually, what we have to do is use this as an opportunity to bring services together in a more integrated way around localities like Melton, like Harbour, and like others, so that we've properly, for the first time in a long time, designed services around people and places, rather than, as happens sadly in the 2-2 structure at the moment, they're designed around organisations. So I think the other point I would make around the difference, and I would draw your attention to the detail in the economic chapter, which speaks very much about the importance and power of driving economic growth strategies around functioning economic areas. And the north is a functioning economic area and the south is a functioning economic area. The north looks towards Nottinghamshire and the areas to the north of it. The south looks to Warwickshire. And what that means is you will then have strategic leadership teams and councils working with key sectors, working with neighbouring areas on driving growth in those areas in a more tailored way. And that again is an organisational reality. When you have leaderships like this, for example, and others already existing, we work with local businesses and we have those relationships, and those bear fruit and drive investment into places. And if we didn't do that, then there's no point in local government doing anything around that. So if you don't believe in that, then we're not doing what we should be doing. So that's the judgment that we've made, trying to design services around and councils around these functioning economic areas, which then should drive more growth than just focusing on administrative boundaries. And if I just finish on the final point you make about representation, I don't think, unless I'm misunderstanding something, that there is parity between the single county proposal and this proposal in terms of representation, because the maximum number of councillors that a single county can have is 100. So government's been clear that's the maximum. I'm not sure what is being proposed at the moment from the county. We're proposing 70 in the north and 70 in the south, therefore 140 across the same area. And therefore the representation in this model would be greater. And my understanding is I think it's 6,000 per resident per member for the single county model, whereas here it's around 4,000. So again, a kind of 50% increase in the number of councillors. So that would increase the level of representation through the North City South model.
Chair, could I just pick up on the IT issue, please?
Yes, by all means.
I absolutely agree. You will not rationalise all of your IT systems for £3 million, which is why we've got the £100 million prudential borrowing, which is there for property and IT. And the IT bit will be well over, I would say, in the tens of millions. The initial 3 million is just making sure the system's alive and safe and can be consolidated when you come to things like the financials to meet the safe and legal. So I 100% agree. £3 million won't be enough by any stretch of the imagination.
Thank you for that further clarification. I think Councillor Gordon had a hand up, and then Councillor Pritchett.
Yeah. First of all, I'm going to listen to all the discussions like tonight and on the council next week. But at the moment, I prefer the recommended option 4. I just thought I'd just put that in there. That's what I recommend for, And another thing is to do with redundancies. Now, if you offer somebody a job which they've got to have training for, and they didn't want it, how will that affect their redundancy if they didn't want it because you've offered them a job?
Well, I think what I would say is every process we go through will be done in accordance with our HR policies. So there are policies we have around compulsory and voluntary redundancy, and they will be followed. So I can't speak to the specific example perhaps you raise. What I will say is though that one of the important facets of this change is making sure we take our staff with us and that they are properly supported through it. Because if we don't get that right, then whatever risks any new council is carrying on day one will be magnified exponentially if we lose all our good people in this process. So the leaders have been really clear. Again, they've made a statement and that is articulated in this document about their desire to support staff through this process. And their commitment to them is to minimise the risk of redundancy and to offering training and support throughout. As a council, we've already increased our training budget by 50% to start that process. And that is something I would recommend we continue to try to do as we go forward.
Thank you.
I mean, I could offer you professional advice on what represents a reasonable offer alternative employment, but you can't afford my fees, unfortunately. Councillor Pritchett.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, I've had the proposal. I don't have the 61 pages of the appendix. And I want to make that quite clear to colleagues and the people watching at home. I don't have the 61 pages in what came through the door. I don't know whether anybody else has got the 61 pages at the end of their pack. It came through. So I didn't receive the 61 pages. Also, I think it's fair to mention that I don't have the City of Leicester's proposal and all their figures. I don't have the County Council's proposals and these with the piles of supportive evidence to go through. And at the end of the day, the government are going to be making a decision on this. And as for the previous paper, Chair, so as for the previous paper, what the council meet, what's our purpose tonight? You know, what comes from here to the council next week?
Sorry.
Sorry.
With regards to council, because scrutiny doesn't report to council, scrutiny's feedback is through cabinet. I think this is just an opportunity, and cabinet will make the decision, not the council, of course. So what will go from here will go to cabinet when it meets on the 19th of November. But as with the previous item, the purpose of scrutiny is to receive the reports, to comment on them, and if it wishes, to direct the chair in making the feedback to the cabinet to make particular points. That's the modus operandi that we've been operating throughout my time here as chair.
Thank you. I'll go through the questions of finance mainly. I think it's also fair to be mentioning that the overview of this we've had before as councillors from the chief executive and fellow officers, so I don't need to go into that. Question on fairer funding assumptions. How do these fairer funding assumptions match up to the single authority assumptions, and what is the level of risk in them? It's the first question.
Do you want? I mean,
yeah. That's the first question. The second question is on page 206. You're going to say 44.3 million, and 5.5 million of that is from asset sales each year. Well, you can only go on for so long, and I think you've identified, I don't know, about 60 million of assets, but you're going to use 20 million of them as capital receipts. You're going to use it to pay debt off, and then you're going to use 20 million for redundancies. So how does that add up? I probably don't understand finance as it's expressed. That's the next question. The other question is, there is prevention as a key feature at the county council now. Now, the prevention measures that you're looking at, you're not criticising the county council now. You're saying what the measures are going to be here. I would feel a lot more comfortable if I had a dossier that was support some case studies how it would work, that was supported by social care think tank, leading academics, health service people, etc. On that one. So it seems to me it's you want to do it to balance, but sooner or later, I'll fall over in the shower and I will need some help. The other financial question I've got is the council tax harmonisation. How will it affect the residents in Melton for the council tax harmonisation? So they're the finance questions, and the only other non-finance question is that I'm a believer that to remain a voice, and particularly of the detail with less councillors, I am supportive of a town council for that reason. I'm also supportive of a town council because I don't want the new unitary authority to spend its time talking about allotments in Loughborough and Melton. So it's a two-reason effort. But those are my finance questions, and I do thank you for a very honest presentation on the finance. I mean, at the council meeting, I will abstain, because I've not seen enough information to tell me which is the best method, and I'm afraid that presentation has not filled me with much confidence, I'm afraid, overall. He's been very honest about the assumptions, and quite a lot of the things that are in there are also in the single county, the risks and issues. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Chair. If I can ask Andy to respond to those finance points, and then I'll perhaps pick up
Sure.
a couple of other bits on the end. Thanks, Andy.
So on the fair funding, he says if he can squint enough, the Leicestershire as a whole gain 4.8% that compared to 25-26. So the models that are available to us start from 26-27 because that's when we believe fair funding will come in. Bearing in mind it's out for consultation, the final proposal is probably 2 or 3 weeks away, but Leicestershire as a whole is 4.8%. The city get 5.4% compared to the north and south, which are both about 4.4%. So the city would see an increase of 5.4% and 4.4% in the north and the south. The 44.3 million, including the asset sales, just to be really clear, and this is sometimes a danger of rushing through something. So the asset sales would be 75 million. It would be the target that we would set. The proposal is to use 40 million to repay debt. And the implications of repaying 40 million of debt is that you save 4 million a year on your capital financing costs. So you don't have to carry on paying your revenue costs to repay the debt because you've settled that. So part of the reason was to use asset sales to reduce the debt burden, which would allow us to invest back into things like IT and the remaining property estate. So that saves you 4 million. The other 1.5 million is the annual savings on running costs for the properties that we would dispose of. Generally accepted rate for revenue costs on an asset value is 2% per year. So on 75 million, that becomes 1.5 million. So the 5.5 million is 4 million from not having to pay debt repayment every year, and 1.5 million for not having to maintain heat, etc. Those premises that you would have disposed of. In terms of the prevention, I think you said kind of, is there a dossier? What we can do in the final submission is include a bit more detail from where we've got the evidence from, because it has come from the Association of Directors of Adult Services. It's come from Newton Europe, who are major players in consultancy on adult social care. And as I said, I believe it was endorsed by the Local Government Association as well. Council tax harmonisation. The Melton has got the least impact of all in terms of harmonisation. So the difference for Melton is if there was no increase in the rates, if you just harmonise the rates, Melton residents would pay £1.14 less per year. Other figures are Charnwood, for example, it's £67 more they would pay per year. And for Rutland residents, it would be £370 less. So that's the implication of harmonising in the north. The south doesn't have quite those same volatile, but Melton is actually the closest to the harmonised rate of all of the authorities in the mix. And just to be clear, you can harmonise in 1 year or up to 7 years.
Thank you very much for that. So there's sort of a magic bullet that everybody's searching for social care. I mean, are you telling me that the county council and the borough councils are paying 10% a year on debt? You say 40 million and the 4 million you're saving on interest. I thought that the public works loans interest rates were beneficial.
Yeah, so the interest rate is generally beneficial, but you have to set. There's a wonderful thing called MRP, which means you have to set aside to repay the principal sum. So you have to if you repay your debt over 20 years, you've got a 5% MRP. That's basically your debt, your principal repayment, and then you've got your interest on top of that. So it depends.
But I thought you said that the interest. So whether we want the buildings or not, we've got to sell them off.
No,
we've got a target to get rid of some, even if we want to use the buildings.
If you don't forget, this is a model. This isn't saying you need to dispose of any properties. This is saying if you did, you could repay 4 million. You could repay 40 million of debt and save 4 million a year capital costs, which is made up of both the principal and interest. And you could save 1.5 million on your running costs. Now, as those two new authorities are created, they will make the shadow authority and then the new authorities will make decisions about their asset base. They may well choose not to dispose of any assets at all, in which case that comes out of the model. So, as I say, we could have done 30 variations of a model. Some would include asset sales, some wouldn't. So it is just something we've put into the model.
Chair, can I just briefly come in? I think there is a really important point here, which is that anything that we propose or any party proposes does not fetter the discretion of any future councils. Those will be sovereign bodies governed by elected members who will make choice at the time on council tax, on assets. What we're saying is it is reasonable to assume that any new council will make decisions to go through a programme of asset rationalisation as it amalgamates into a bigger entity. What exactly it chooses to do will be a matter for them. We're saying that we think it's important to retain service centres in key settlements like Melton so that residents still have a connection and a face of their council for them. And therefore, the saving that's been built into the model is actually relatively modest in the context of the overall portfolio. We're not saying we're going to cut it by 50%. We're saying 15%, which actually is a relatively modest amount across what is a huge asset portfolio across all of the 10 councils. So we've made some assumptions and they've been built into our model, but it's not matters of policy because we can't set policy and no one can for those future councils. We are simply making some assumptions that we can show government we've considered what we think is reasonable to build into the savings that come forward. And if I can just respond to a couple of other points, I think really helpful point from Councillor Pritchett about bringing the idea of prevention to life and actually sharing some case studies and the empirical academic underpinning of some of those arguments that Andy has spoken about, and we can make sure that's more clearly articulated in the final submission. Just to say, the appendices that have been referred to tonight are in your agenda pack. They are linked, so you can find them at Appendix C in the report. You will find a link in your report which will take you straight to those appendices, and the community governance review, which is required to initiate the town council option, is certainly something this council can consider as part of this process. And there have been discussions over recent weeks with group leaders and others about the possibility of taking that forward. And we are looking at the timescales and resources required to bring that forward. And we're intending to bring something back to members in due course.
Thank you for that, Ed. I was just going to pick up on the appendices. I hadn't started what you said. There's hyperlinks to the appendices. Now, of course, well, forgive me, Councillor Pritchett, let me finish. I never have mine printed off, so I hadn't noticed. And if there's an issue with those who request printed copies, so it depends on the volume that would be involved, that may need to be addressed, but it's not going to be resolved here and now. That's all I wanted to say.
For the only final thing is I think it's somewhat ambitious, the 1150 new council houses. You know, when you talk about land acquisition, you've got to change your policy, your local plan policies. You know, you're looking at up to 300 million that you're going to manage it. You're not going to enable housing authority. You're going to access. So that seems to me ambitious. And in terms of the staffing, basically you're going to be a construction company. I think somewhat ambitious that.
I could share with you an old election leaflet of mine from 30 years ago where we were promising to build 400 council houses a year. Times have changed for all sorts of reasons. Can I actually ask, before I didn't see any other hands up. I just wanted to probe just around some of the assumptions being made on achieving efficiencies, and particularly around staffing and property. And I think the two are linked in some ways, because given the current proposals, it seems to me, and I think I've been to every one of the council's head offices that are actually part of this whole process, including Leicestershire, and including Leicester City before they knocked their office down. That if this were to go ahead, there's actually an immediate issue that the bulk, the biggest county council property will sit in the Southern Unitary Authority, unless it's subsumed by Leicester after all. So right from the start, we're going to have issues about whether there's not so much is there a surplus of property, but where we sit in this northern one as to whether we'll actually have pressures from the start, and that actually might incur a cost rather than actually make a saving. I mean, it's obviously very difficult because we're not having the dialogue with the county and the city as part of this process for the reasons that have been well explained previously. And then also around premises in the neighbourhoods, and it's linked. That's why I say I think staffing is linked to it. Almost inherently, if you're looking at setting up neighbourhoods, and I'm not arguing against that. I think it's one of the very sound proposals in this package. But it's very different having neighbourhoods stretched across the area and potentially lots of premises as a result. In the staffing levels you require, the numbers of reduction are quite small, and that could be quite vulnerable. And I just wonder how those have been linked together. And I think that was the only thing I wanted to say. Oh, there's one other issue, but I'll come back to that separately because it's unrelated.
So thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the detail around implementation is obviously for the next phase in terms of how actually things will work. I mean, the reality is that as far as possible from day one, we will seek to maintain. I mean, this again is a general principle for whatever change comes forward. We need to be as pragmatic as possible, and as far as possible, for most people, they would finish work on the 31st of March, go into one place, and then come to work the next day, go into the same place, because actually that's what we need to do to maintain some continuity. There is a challenge around where some of these locations might fall between two places, and that is part of the next phase around how you manage disaggregation, if that's what government chooses to do. As I've said before, and we are quite clear, you should not underestimate disaggregation of council services. It is a serious and significant issue. And managing how and establishing how you would do that is going to be one of the key parts of this. I think what's been interesting to see from the Surrey announcement just yesterday is that whilst there are risks inherent in that, and government is clearly keen to see how those risks are mitigated, they've demonstrated they are willing to accept that they can be taken forward. And the same issue will be one that Surrey have to contend with, where many of their staff will be located at one county council office that exists at the moment, and then they will have to redistribute those as they split east and west in Surrey. So, you know, we have assets at the moment, and part of our transition, if our proposal was accepted, would be to look at what the new requirements are between north and south, look at what assets we have in north and south, and then think about how we start to redistribute those. So it is a challenge, but it's one that can be managed, and it's one we would work through as part of the next phase.
Councillor Lumley.
Sure. Yeah, I've just got firstly just say off thank you to the SLT of this council, all the councils in Leicestershire, and the council leaders have done quite a good job actually of, you know, all the hard work they've done in trying to get to this point. Got two questions. On the earlier slide, I think it was about pay realignment of about 9.5 million. Is that regarding like gender pay gap? Which I've read about at sort of like Birmingham City Council, which is a really serious a cost and admit to them, or is it something else? And question two, regarding like council tax setting, just for confirmation, are we expecting every single sort of like resident in the whole of this whole new sort of like council that we're going into expected to pay the like same rate, or different existing former areas paying like slightly different rates? And on that, the like Conservative Party leader on Leicestershire County Council did a comments on social media, I think the last week or so, and just if anyone's got an answer to her question, but she was saying that because like Rutland County Council residents pay more than anybody else, seemingly we could start to set council tax at their council rate level. But I'm not sure if that was the exact thing that she was saying actually. But yeah, can get an answer on that, those two. Thank you.
Thanks. If I come in first, and Andy, if there's anything to add, just come back to me. I think what you may be referring to, Councillor Lumley, because certainly the only one I can see at 9.5 million was income equalisation. So I'll maybe come to Andy in a minute just to explain a little bit more about what that is. But it's nothing to do with kind of equal pay claims, so it's not associated with that or the issues that Birmingham City Council have faced in relation to that. In terms of council tax harmonisation, as Andy already mentioned, so the model, and again, this is not a policy because it will be for the future councils to decide what they do with council tax, but the model assumes, on the basis of creating fairness for all residents, as they move into a new council, all residents would move to a harmonised council tax rate on the basis of creating a fair position, so you've not got a mismatch where one is paying more and one is paying less. That in harmonising, Melton actually residents, we are slap bang in the middle of that process, and the difference in a Bandy property is £1 less than we currently pay, or that Melton residents currently pay. So the impact locally would be very little, but everyone would be paying the same, and so it would be fair and it would be balanced out. Andy, do you want to just comment any more on the income equalisation aspect?
Yeah, just very quickly on the harmonisation, the idea that you can equalise it up to Rutland. You're not allowed to do that. So your yield, as in your total council tax take, must be the same after you've harmonised as it was before. You can't just say Rutland pay 2,400 and therefore everyone will pay that. That's absolutely not the case. So you harmonise so that your total council tax yield is the same as what it would have been if everyone carried on paying different rates. Hence why some go up and some go down. The only thing you don't harmonise is parish precepts. So you harmonise the county rate and the district rates, but you don't harmonise the parish precept. The income equalisation, yes, that is to do with. So let's take the green waste, which I think I mentioned earlier. One authority don't charge anything for green waste. Others charge up to, I think it's £61 annually for collecting green waste. We're saying, as part of the model, you should equalise that, whether you equalise it up to the highest point, which is what we've done for the model, or not. As Ed has said, and as you're all aware, these are not decisions we're taking. We're just saying that's what we've plugged into the model. So if you're going to equalise your council tax, it's only right that everyone who's in the same council should pay the same for their green waste collection. It would be a bit perverse for somebody to not have to pay for their green bin to be collected and someone a few doors away pays and they're in the same council. So I hope that clarifies that.
Councillor Thwaites.
And just to, it brings up another point as well, but just to let you know that the green waste in this borough is £98, I think. I think that's how much I paid a few months ago for my green waste. So just to get those figures if we're doing harmonisation. But it does raise the other question of long-term contracts and how that, I know that the answer might be, well, that's going to be a problem of the new authority, but obviously things like the Biffa waste contract, both here and the one that the county have for the actual waste disposal, they're long-term contracts. How are they going to transition into the new authority?
Chair, there are provisions in what's called structural changes order that will be made, which will be what brings to life the government's decision and puts it into law. And one of the things that they do, they're fairly formulaic. There's some things which we will have some input to, but what they do is they establish a transition process which places certain obligations on the shadow authority when it's elected and certain obligations on the existing authorities, whoever they may be and whoever's successful with the submission, that when they're working on the implementation plan, they have to cooperate. And one of the things they'll be doing is looking at things like those long-term contracts. They'll be negotiating with the contractors. It will be making sure that any future procurements are aligned and making sure it does everything it can to minimise the costs to that authority when it takes effect. But subject to that process, any long-term contracts will become an obligation of the new authority. So there was procurement down the line, which obviously is outside of our control. But that's where there may be a difference between charges that are levied to the public and the costs of provision. Of course, they may differ slightly, and that's something which obviously the model the model has addressed to an extent as and is referred to, but obviously that's the detail of that is when is for when the shadow authority is getting that implementation plan ready.
Just to say as well, not necessarily looking at now, but I would just draw the committee's attention to page 19 of the appendices, which does reflect the point around the garden waste. And I think the reason why it's been not harmonised to the level in Melton is because it's outsourced to a third party, whereas the other prices are set by the councils themselves, and therefore in the direct control of the council, whereas through the contract that we have with BIFA, that price is set by them, which is why we're not the model is not harmonised to a level that's outside of our control. But that point is addressed, just to be clear.
I was just thinking about, you could almost write the election leaflets for 2027 now, and they'll all be referring to green waste with what across the new area, won't they? Councillor Pritchett.
Thank you. I'll be checking the appendices for more on highways, risks, projections, costs, etc., because there's very little in this document. Following on from your point about the disposal of a property in Leicester, we've been talking tonight about what have been traditional, mostly county council services, and the pressures that we've got coming back down to traditional borough council things. We've had rich councils, so like North West Leicestershire and Rushcliffe, whereas Melton, so rich councils like North West Leicestershire and Rushcliffe have been paying for crematoriums, leisure centres, where Melton struggles. And at the moment, Melton can't fund the new leisure centre and various other things. Now, when we move to this new model, there's no guarantee that there'll be money available for that sort of thing in this new model. And I don't know to what degree in your detail that that anybody's built in these traditional facilities provided by borough councils.
Andy, can I invite you just to speak to the sustainability plan again? Because I think one of the things that we've sought to demonstrate through the model, and again, it has assumptions and again, it has risk associated with it, is the idea that there is potential for headroom that then does facilitate greater investment. Because precisely to your point, Councillor Pritchett, we don't have either the assets or the ability to raise the capital to make those kind of investments, but potentially a larger council would have that potential in future if it managed itself effectively. But Andy, is there anything you want to speak to, particularly in relation to the model on that?
I only to repeat something I said earlier. The capital, the debt that will be inherited from the existing councils will be the envy of every other area going through LGR, as in Leicestershire have the lowest debt levels. That means there will certainly be room to invest. So a good business case put forward for a service, you're not struggling against a debt ceiling that you can't borrow any more money. You've got a lot of headroom if it's affordable in terms of your revenue repayment. So as Ed said, there is good headroom to make investments in service priorities. What we couldn't do in the model is say, we're going to assume you will want to build a leisure centre or a library or a new road, etc., etc. So, but be reassured when it comes to those decisions. As I say, you are the envy of all the other LGR areas in terms of your ability to invest in new services.
For that, so there's headroom, but the headwind is political. In the early stages of this, there was one or more councillors from North West Leicestershire didn't want to share their wealth. And Melton and Rutland will have a small number of councillors, so it won't be straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, just an observation, Councillor Pritchett, but I mean, you could say the same within our little world of Melton Borough Council. That it isn't always the case that all parts of the borough feel that they're getting equal service and representation. Just wait one moment, Councillor Holmes. Yeah, I think I'll finish that. Sorry, Councillor Holmes. Yeah.
Be off early in the morning. But I think we've left something out. I still maintain that we want to be in the plan that I suggested. And what about Oadby and Wigston? If we added Oadby and Wigston, you would then have virtually a right split, and you would have a lot of commerce, you would have a lot of wealth in that area. So I can't see, I think that would level up a lot better.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you want to respond to that?
Only. I mean, I think that probably still only takes you to 250,000, which is probably still below the threshold in terms of population. There are many ways in which you could carve up Leicestershire and Rutland. Ultimately, there's choices that our leaders have made in terms of having talked through options and started with a blank piece of paper when this process started and worked through things. As I say, I think we had to quickly rule out options that did not get us close to that 500,000 population that government has referred to. But yeah, the links with Harborough, Melton, Rutland and Oadby and Wigston would probably still only take you to about 250,000 population, so still below that threshold.
Right. As Councillor Pritchett said about Northwest, wouldn't want to particularly do things that, because they like to be on their own because they're so much more wealthy than anywhere else. So how is it going to work then? How many, if we are very rural, so how are the numbers of councillors going to work? Are there going to be more? I mean, I'm just sitting listening to this, more in more industrial areas than the rural areas, because if that is the case, we will lose out, won't we, for the more rural areas? And this is what my concern has always been.
I mean, in some ways, these matters are kind of beyond the scope of what I can really respond to. Our model assumes 4,000 residents per member. Clearly, areas of denser populations will have more members. So naturally, places like Loughborough and Colville will have a greater representation because of the size of those populations, and it will be for those future councils and the members who represent this area to champion the needs of this area and to secure what they require as members do today at this council and at the county council. And that will be a challenge for the new unitaries to work out. The potential benefit arising from that for this community is that the funding that is secured in all parts of the community will be to the benefit of all parts of the community and distributed across it. So that will be the opportunity for Melton to be the beneficiaries of funding that arises across the whole area, not just from this community.
I think we're probably not going to resolve this today. I mean, but I will say my take on it is that we all come with different perspectives and agendas, partly about where we sit in this borough, and hopefully by coming together we arrive at the most sensible and reasonable solutions and ways of working. Doesn't always turn out perfectly, but it's maybe the best we've got, and I think the new authority will be similar to that. I just want to raise one more point, and then unless anybody else has got anything, I'll call the meeting to then. It's a simple question, Ed. In terms of, you mentioned ward boundaries that we dealt with at a later stage. Will that require the involvement of the Electoral Commission? I only ask that because that would throw a whole issue about timescales into question.
So my understanding, and I'll double check this, is that the ward boundaries will be established as part of the next stage, the transition and implementation stage, in advance of vesting day. But what that generally happens is within a couple of years of the formation of the new council, the Electoral Commission will do a boundary review. So they will look and check whether things that may be being put together as a matter of pragmatism are actually the right stuff, right approach, and they'll go through it again. So there'll be a first stage and then it will be reviewed.
and hold things up unnecessarily. Yeah. Okay. Right, thank you. I don't see. I'm actually not going to look around to see if any hands are raised because I think the feeling of the meeting is we've been here long enough tonight. But thank you, everybody. I know it's been a long evening, but we've had two quite weighty issues to discuss, and thank everybody for their contribution. I'll close the meeting now.